All right, you guys ready to hack? I can't hear you. Ready to hack? I'm Dave Schreier from MIT. I want to welcome you all here this morning, and we're delighted to be down here from Cambridge with our friends and colleagues from Harvard to join you in this health hack. I'm going to introduce to you a man who is an entrepreneur, composer, the founder of man-made music, Joel Beckerman. You may be wondering why we have a composer at a health hackathon, and Joel is going to tell you why.
Thanks, Dave. It's human nature to respond to the power of sound. We're wired for it as human beings. Every single moment of our lives, whether we realize it or not, sound is there, affecting our mood, guiding our choices, making and breaking personal connections that we have. It is this unseen, powerful actor in our lives in so many different ways. So, why is a composer here at a health hackathon? Hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll have a little bit better of a sense of why that is. But suffice to say that as a composer for primarily television and film, what I've generally done is to create music and sound for screen. And in general, one of my great passions has been realizing all these things that I apply to curation and creation of music and sound, stories on a screen, can apply to everything outside the screen as well. So really my wish is to sort of explore the world, and not just what's on the screen, and to inspire people who aren't even composers, who are just people who are passionate about human interaction, and passionate about problem solving, and passionate about product design, and passionate about a whole number of different things, to utilize the same kind of sonic and musical thinking that composers do for the rest of the world. That's essentially what I'm doing today. I'm just going to pull this chair over this a little easier. So guys, I have some stump speeches. You could watch one of them another time about this and from the book that I wrote, which I'll say a little bit about it in a little bit. But I really wanted to forego the stump speeches today, kind of make this a little bit more of a dialogue conversation. So if you're expecting a glitzy presentation, you're going to probably be disappointed. But if you're going to expect more of a conversation, hopefully that's what's going to serve everybody here. So I'm the founder of Man-Made Music. I'm a composer. I'm also author of this book, The Sonic Boom. I'm not a scientist. But really, when I think about power of sound, it's not really just about science. It's really about what I like to call sonic humanism. And the way I define sonic humanism and what I want to talk about today, and I have to tell you, this is early thinking, okay? There's a lot, it's not like I created sound or I created uses for sound in products and a whole bunch of different places. I contribute to this, but what I'm hoping to do is to bring together all the people that have a lot to say about this subject and begin to sort of look at how we can apply these things in more cohesive ways. So what I'm hoping to do today is to share some of my thinking, the thinking of my colleagues who are here as well, and also some of the thinking that's out in the scientific community in terms of how sound can be applied specifically to healthcare problems. So I talk about sonic humanism. Sonic humanism really is the strategic use of music and sound to benefit people. So a lot of times people would think strategic and music and sound, those kind of don't make sense because you think about music and sound as being visceral, and it is, but when you strategically use it, when you use it purposefully, when you use it thoughtfully, when you use it understanding certain principles about how we react as humans and what sound and music can do and what it can't do, some pretty amazing opportunities come up, and I'm going to share some examples of that, hopefully, if I do my job right, inspire you to think about this a little bit as you're working on your hacks today. So sonic humanism really also, it applies certainly to life sciences. I'm sure a number of people here have read or at least seen some of the books that have to do with neuroscience and music and sound. We know there's a lot of things, I'm sure some of the documentation and things like that coming up here. But also, and I think this is possibly one of the places we're not paying as much attention is really in social sciences. When you think about, for instance, the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was essentially scored by spirituals because Martin Luther King quoted speeches, or quoted spirituals in his speeches, and that inspired people in sit-ins to sing spirituals, which then inspired artists to create new arrangements of spirituals. So essentially, that entire period of time, you were surrounded by that in the soundtrack. Now, did that cause civil rights to move forward? I can't make a direct correlation, but I can tell you that when things, as human beings, when we have pervasive sound in our soundtrack, it does change our minds, it does change our behavior, it does remind us of things. So, just a slide here. Okay, so this is the book I wrote. There are actually some copies here somewhere, I think that we're giving out at some point. There are free chapters online so you can check it out. But the book is Sonic Boom, How Sound Transforms the Way We Think, Feel, and Vibe. So some of it has to do with work that I do as a composer. A lot of it, probably 75% of it, has to do with how sound applies in all these other areas of the world. And there are a lot of sort of humorous stories and fun stories. There's a story about a young woman who was an MBA graduate who could not get a job because at the end of her sentences, everything went up, so people didn't trust her, she was very bright. And she straightened out her mode of communication through some coaching and everything, got the very first job that she applied for after. And really, what some of the research showed is that 70%, literally 70% of what people glean from conversations has to do with the way you say what you say. And only 30% really has to do with what you say. So there are things that may seem nonsensical, but these apply to our thinking, apply the way that we function as human beings. Again, we're wired for this. These are all things, so much of this is what happens at this subconscious level that we're not even really aware of. So let's talk just a little bit really about what gives sound and music its unique power. It's primal, it's visceral. Emotions really, as probably most of you know, are triggered by impulses in the limbic brain, which is really one of the oldest parts of the brain. So we realize that we're affected by these things without even knowing. Okay. A baby cry scientifically provokes the most reaction out of any sound for human beings. So when you think about it, thank goodness, because that's really that's one thing that has enabled our species to survive. When you think about when we were out in the wilderness, okay, and you hear a twig snap, what does that mean? It could mean you're about to be eaten or you're about to find your dinner. So there are all sorts of very subtle sonic cues that we really had to be able to distinguish to be able to survive as a species. So really nothing is more powerful. Also, obviously, not only did you get information from the baby cry, but I'm sure you had a visceral reaction. It's just, again, we're wired for this. You have a visceral emotional reaction from sounds. And that's one of the things I want to be talking about in terms of how you can apply this principle to of this type of design thinking, sonic design thinking, potentially to some of your solutions today. So there are many specific examples of how music really positively transforms patients in different a number of disorders, including dementia, depression, PTSD, and autism. Again, there's a lot of documentation in the book about a few of these. There's more we can share with you, and JD is, who's here today, is really studying a tremendous amount of this research that's out there. One in particular, one instance we're really interested in looking deeper into has to do with stroke victims. There was a program which was designed basically where stroke victims, through different movements of their body, let's say the affected limbs, could actually create musical sounds by specifically moving their arm in certain orientations and using certain musculature. And in this study, basically, musical sonification, essentially, of their movements ended up providing a tremendous benefit for patients that went through this treatment as compared to didn't, those who didn't, in terms of actual recovery time. So there were very specific, and again, this is early days for this thinking. It's kind of, there are a lot of one-off studies and one-off instances we can point to. What we're continuing to look to do is to collect data and look for new opportunities to apply this thinking. So,
one resident that Billy opened her eyes, she didn't respond.
Here's one example I'm going to show you.
Once we put the iPod on her, she started shaking her feet, started moving her head. It was amazing.
Music has more ability to activate more parts of the brain than any other stimulus.
By exciting or awakening those pathways, we have a gateway to stimulate and reach somebody who otherwise is unreachable.
So a lot of you may be familiar with the work of Dr. Oliver Sacks, who has broken some pretty amazing ground in some of these areas. An elderly man had fainted and suffered a seizure. Doctors in the Metro West Medical Center emergency room were worried that his symptoms might foreshadow a heart attack, so he was admitted to the hospital and placed on cardiac monitoring. The next morning, what doctors suspected was true. A nurse had found the patient without a pulse, slumped in a chair. The monitor's crisis alarm should have sounded when his heart stopped. It didn't, however, because the machine's cables had slipped off the man's chest nearly 3 hours earlier. That triggered a different leads off alarm, but someone silenced it without fixing the problem, and subsequent beeps were neither heard and clearly or certainly ignored, according to the State Department of Public Investigation. So there's a lot of issues. One very specific healthcare issue we want to talk about today, which I know that there was one group that's actually working on this, is what we talk about as alarm fatigue. And a number of you may already know that literally the number 3 cause of death in the United States, is medical errors. And some percentage of this certainly can be traced back or at least somewhat connected to things like hospital alarm fatigue. So when we look at, for instance, there's some data points from the American Association of Critical Care Nurses, the AACN. Although studies show it is difficult for humans to differentiate amongst more than 6 different alarms, the average number of alarms in ICU has increased from 6 in 1983 to more than 40 different alarms in 2011. In addition, 80 to 99% of electrocardiograph monitor alarms are false or clinically insignificant. 80 to 99%. This is not thoughtful use of sound. This is not helping patients. This is actually a din, a cacophonous din in emergency rooms, in patients' rooms, even in doctors' offices, that healthcare workers have learned to tune out because it's the only way they can kind of go to work every day. So it's a tremendously important issue that needs to be addressed in this country and actually worldwide. So think about the issue around this is not just that there are all this meaningless sound. The World Health Organization recommends a background level in healthcare environments of only 35 decibels of sound. And if you imagine if we had the first 2 or 3 rows of people here sort of quietly talking to each other, that's what that level of sound would be, the maximum level of sound the World Health Organization recommends. When actual decibel levels of background noise for nighttime and daytime in hospitals are significantly higher. Remember that these are logarithmic scales. So the difference between 35 and 60 plus is an enormous difference. And so not only is all this sound meaningless, but it's creating this din that actually is adverse to people getting better in hospitals. Alarm hazards ranked #1 on the 2014 Emergency Care Research Institute top 10 health technology hazards. Yet there has not been a consistent approach either from manufacturers of devices, from doctors or hospitals or any other organizations that we're aware of to solve this problem and really look at it. And this is something we can do, something that we can do right now. It doesn't require advanced technology. These are all off-the-shelf solutions. We could talk a little bit about it, but I'm interested in what the people who are focusing on this in their hack are going to come up with. 19 out of 20 hospitals rank alarm as a top concern, yet it's not been addressed. Why? And this is something we come across all the time, no matter what the field is having to do with sonic design. Because sound operates on this subconscious level for us, we're not really aware of its effect. A lot of times you don't know the effect of sound until it's gone. So if you were to put somebody in a situation where they had 60 or 70 decibels worth of background noise in a room, they may not even be aware because you acclimate to it. It happens at that subconscious level. Take away that sound, duck it down from 70 dB down to 35 dB, and all of a sudden you realize how much that sound has been affecting you. You heard those beeps in the story that I played. Now imagine that multiplied by 5, 6, 7, 8 devices within a particular patient's zone that they are, where they're in a hospital bed. And how much that sound, how much energy it takes you to sort of block that out. And on healthcare workers who are there all the time. So it's a huge issue. The FDA identified that 862 alarm-related deaths occurred in the current 7-year period. Now this is just ones that they identified. We think this is dramatically underreported in the US, and this is just the US. This is not global. So globally, I think it's fair to say that certainly in the same 7-year period, there were many thousands of deaths specifically related to alarm fatigue and alarm-related issues. So the problems: volume of alarms, the number of alarms, inconsistent in meaning, because each manufacturer, they don't have a consistent palette of sound. So imagine, well, we'll talk about the opportunities in a second. The frequency that this happens, the frequency that occurs, the acoustic properties of hospital spaces, devices that are unaware of each other. This is probably the biggest aspect of this. Imagine if you were in a hospital room, and again, I'm going to get to the solutions in a second, but imagine if you're in a hospital room where all of a sudden all those devices in the whole area around you were aware of the alarm state of all the other devices around you. And what opportunities that provides for caregivers to be much more effective and efficient, and also for patients to have a much better quality of life while they're in that hospital room, and how that potentially could lead towards quicker recoveries. So other sonic opportunities in healthcare. Sonification of data. I got a chance to listen to a little bit of the talks that were done yesterday, and that idea of the explosion of data in healthcare and medical profession is a huge boon. But the question is, how do you take that data and make it something useful, right? I mean, that obviously is a huge issue in healthcare overall. So I want to talk to you about sonification of data. So jet pilots have this right now, and you can't necessarily, or I can't necessarily decode exactly what's happening there, but here's what I can tell you. And this is also, again, kind of early thinking, but if you are a jet fighter pilot operating at Mach 1 or Mach 2, things are happening very quickly. You can only pay attention to and scan so many devices or so many gauges on your control panel in a very, very short period of time. So there's a lot of data. And in fact, some of the most critical data for jet pilots occurs sonically in their headsets. They have binaural interfaces where they can hear a beat coming behind them and they know that the threat is behind them or above them or below them. So it's positional. It's also a series of pulses. Again, this is very rudimentary. There are a lot of things that can be done that are much more sophisticated, that provide more subtle cues. But what they look at is, for fighter pilots, and we all know, obviously, a lot of times the most effective technologies are built for the military. But then the question is, how are we going to now use this for the rest of us? And in terms of sonification of data, that's just critical data that needs to be known in an instant, that can make really a life or death difference. There are huge opportunities in terms of sonification of data. So I want to share one thing right now, which again is kind of rudimentary, but it's by a student, Brian Fu, who used, he calls it Rhapsody in Gray, which is showing how specific input into data streams about specific, well, I just have to show you what the, probably have to show you the video first to explain it, but there are a number of different factors that are being measured and put into graphs here. And what he's done is he's come up with sounds that specifically relate to different data points within this scan of a patient who's undergoing a seizure. And you can see, let's see, here we go. So this is before a seizure. This is a patient who is experiencing a seizure. And the resting state again. So what we have here is multi-timbral music, multiple layers. Imagine the possibilities of each of those layers could actually mean something to a doctor or to the nurse. Imagine if things like tempo and timbre and all the different aspects of music can be applied to specific data points. The human ear and the human mind and its ability to pick out incredibly small differences in things like tempo and pitch and texture is, basically we have within us an incredibly fine-tuned device that we can understand tremendously complex bits of data. And one of the things that might be very interesting, actually, I think this is on a later slide, but one of the things I'd like to help you understand, first of all, is that, and it may not be, it's probably counterintuitive, it's probably not intuitive at all, but actually we react to sound quicker than any other sense, even touch. And again, I'll show some data about this in a moment. But in this, in so much as we respond to sound first, often sound becomes the galvanizer of all the other senses. Because when you think about it, most of the experiences that we have in life are multisensory. You have visual, verbal, all the different sounds that you might hear, and things you might see, experiences you might have, but almost all of them are multisensory. But because you respond to the sound first, that organizes the rest of the senses. So, again, we'll talk about this more when that part comes up. But sonic and mobile healthcare, again, is a huge opportunity. So this is actually something that we created, has nothing to do with healthcare, but I think it points the way to some of the possibilities here. So for the Weather Channel, they came to us and said, look, there are two important moments in our apps. Actually, we've added a couple others now. And what we want to do is, we don't think about a phone as a phone. We think about a phone as a speaker in your pocket. So if there is immediate information that you need to know about, that's important to you, or your purse, and you hear a sound, it can give you information without even have to take your phone out of your purse or out of your pocket. So, let me share with you a couple of sounds that we created for the Weather Channel, and then let's talk about how it applies back to healthcare. So this first sound is breaking now. Second one here is severe weather alert. We play those for you again because they go by very quickly. So the first sound sounds a bit newsy, doesn't it? It sounds sort of like something important. It sort of reminds you of like a television news moment or something. And that's intentional because this is basically like a news alert. The second alert is this severe weather alert. When you think about different parts of the country, understanding that there might be a tornado in your neighborhood is a life or death moment, okay? Getting under cover, getting to a safe place in the middle of the country when there's a tornado is a huge issue. So that sound sounds kind of like what you would expect it needs to sound. It almost has a little bit of weather associated with it. And this is really important. This is a really important thing to understand as compared to, for instance, the jet fighter. This is just a bunch of beeps. Beeps are not emotionally compelling. They might give you information. They give you functional data points to understand, but not emotional data points. And one of the things that we're provoking in our clients and the folks that we work with in a variety of other fields is looking at sounds that are intuitive, sounds that emotionally, so again, sound is emotional. We might as well use that tool because it instantly can help people understand things. It shortens the learning curve of understanding what that sound means. And it again, just like the baby cry, it provokes this visceral reaction. So now that I've said that, let me play it one more time. Breaking down. It has a certain amount of weather to it. So what does that mean essentially for healthcare? So for healthcare, the opportunity again is for both healthcare providers. Let's say a nurse was down the hall. If we had sounds rather than just a cacophonous field of beeps that didn't really mean much, if there was an isolated sound, like that kind of isolated sound, that could let a caregiver know that there's an emergency condition, but not only that it's an emergency condition, but specifically which one it is, and they immediately know what the course of action is. Before they even walk in the room, they have a sense of what they're walking into. What could those saved seconds or moments provide in terms of better quality care? Here we go again with the video. So, sonic curation for patients. This is another area we want to talk about where we think there's a huge opportunity in terms of where sonic can make a big difference. So, imagine, again, thinking about all the beeps again, and the loud cacophony of sound that is in a room. What if there were a device, just as we give patients the opportunity to, with a plunger, be able to administer their own pain medication when they need it? And doctors, as you guys I'm sure know, have found that patients need less pain medication when they can control themselves. What if we gave them the opportunity to control their own sonic landscape in their room? You could choose birds if that's what you wanted. White noise to create fake silence, because you will acclimate to that sound, or some kind of light music. So we think there's an enormous opportunity to allow patients to create their own soundscape in their hospital rooms. So, sonic humanism, again, what I want to talk about today is really the design trees. This is now getting down to what we all think is probably the most actionable for you specifically. So, I talked about, just to back up for half a second, I talked about a number of different opportunities specifically in healthcare. And certainly we'd be thrilled if anyone took on any of those. But I want to remind you that these sonic truths, these sonic design trees can be applied probably to almost every hack that happens here today. And it may not be immediately apparent, again, because all this operates on a subconscious level. No one's really been trained for this. We haven't been trained for this. We're training ourselves for it, and again, it's very early days, which is why we have JD back here, if you can raise your hand, JD, and Kristen over here from Anime Music, who have donated their time to come today to speak with you. And I would suggest, ask, plead that each of you, each group, have a conversation with them, a brief conversation, and they can tell you probably within a few minutes whether Sonic could be an opportunity for your hack or not, whether Sonic could make a big difference in your hack or not. So let me get to the design truths. So the first one is you react to sound first before any other sense registers, even touch. This is a little chart of 1 second brain science, and you can see that the reaction time for sound is 146 milliseconds, where touch is 149. Which again makes sound the organizer of the senses. This may point to you in some of your hacks an opportunity where people can react quicker, where sound again can be the instigator or can be the guiding principle for how a human being would react to a particular piece of stimulus. So what if sound was used more efficiently to elicit response in emergency circumstances? We talked about that. Sound was designed to improve response times. Sound could prioritize concerns quickly and intuitively. So we have signposts. Some symbols are actually universal. We find them in every single country. We're looking to do the same thing in sound. So design truth number 2 is that you can only understand a limited number of sounds at one time. And generally that's 3. Foreground, midground, and background. Background essentially gives you context for midground and foreground. Foreground is something that is designed like an alarm to grab your attention. Background is something that is probably just barely at the level of perception. Midground is something that's in the middle. So what if we reconsider alarm priorities and frequency of how often we sound? What if there was a standardization of sounds across devices and platforms so that there becomes a common language that healthcare providers get to know, and actually patients who spend a significant amount of time in the hospital would also get to know? Right now, everyone's just alarmed all the time. It's just confusing. Alarms and alerts were controlled by smart algorithms to grade volume and intensity according to urgency. Devices knew the state of other devices and understood the hierarchy of priority. Again, all these things speak to this specific design truth. Truth number 3 is that sound provides emotional context for every communication. This may be our most important design truth because the context, you must consider the context of any sound that you introduce into an environment, whether it's for healthcare or entertainment or whatever it is. Sound provides an emotional context for every single communication that happens. Really, really important to remember. So let me give you an example. Apple. This was their startup sound in the early days of Apple. Hear it again. Okay, this is the modern startup sound for Apple. Anybody want to shout out the difference? When you hear that sound, what does it make you feel? Powerful? Warm, calm? Motivated? Okay, you get an emotional response from that sound. It's a carefully planned sound. It's a big, giant C chord. Sound provides emotional context for every communication, okay? So that's a communication. What you just heard was a communication. Devices can communicate. What if alarms more precisely communicated urgency? Sounds alerted, but they didn't annoy. What if we considered how curated music or ambience affects the mood of patients and staff in a positive way? Sound and music could play a role in mental health. One of IntraHealth's top 10 health concerns of 2015. Sound and music could meaningfully contribute to mobile health and global health surveillance. There are tremendous opportunities. Design truth 4. Sound opportunities exist both inside and outside the human vocal range. The human vocal range is super crowded. A lot of manufacturers and a lot of people who are trying to introduce sound into devices and into spaces are all crowding into that human vocal range. If you're creating a device and you're creating sound that's in that human vocal range, there's only one reason to do that, and that's if you're trying to interrupt. If you're not trying to interrupt, if you're trying to enhance, it should be outside the human vocal range. So what if we redesigned alarms accordingly? We reconsider the design of mobile health information and devices. Truth number 5, silence is sonic design white space. Just like if you were designing a painting, if you're creating a painting, or you were designing a space that you, if you're an architect, white space is incredibly important. It's exactly the same concern in sonic design. So if you use sound in your hacks, and we suggest you at least consider it, make sure that you're thinking about the white space. Because as sonic designers, as people who are interested in really promoting situations that are better for human beings, we have to be thinking about silence as much as we're thinking about sound, sometimes more. So what if we reconsidered the sound in healthcare environments, pledging to trash the sonic trash? We call sound that is meaningful sound, that doesn't help, it's not purposeful, that doesn't enhance experiences or make things clearer, really is sonic trash. What if we redesigned hospital acoustics with sound attenuating materials? What if we reconsidered where alarms were positioned in relationship to the patient? What if we utilized current sound directive technology to direct sound away from patients? All huge opportunities in terms of creating really fake silence or certainly things that are much quieter. So just in review, these are the sonic design truths that we would like for you to consider. Again, I really encourage every team, every hack team, to at least have a 5-minute conversation with either Kristen or with JD. And because there are surprising opportunities when you're open to considering them and thinking about them, sometimes in places that we just absolutely would never have expected. So I'm going to ask each of you to think about that as a filter. So just to introduce Joel Dueck for a second. Joel comes from a background in science, but made his way to a successful career as a composer, very successful composer. He's also bringing together these two passions to help unravel the mysteries of music of the mind, and also make positive contribution wherever creativity can be a cure for the world's ills. He actually just sat on a panel which was really all about UN negotiation and how sound can be effective, an effective tool for negotiation. Kristen Lueck is our strategist, culture and innovation at Man-Made. She has a background in music and sound as it relates to radio and TV and film, although she now focuses on strategic use of music and sound. And specifically, her expertise is culture and innovations and how that basically can potentially shape what we want to hear. So thank you for your time. I really wish everyone great luck on the hacks. And again, encourage you to use our resources here. And thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot. Now, I know I'm thinking about medicine and hospitals and sound in a different way. Appreciate your time and those comments. So we're going to move on to Deborah Estrin in 1 minute. Before we turn the camera to Deborah, I want to welcome everyone here at Cornell Tech one more time. Just to give everyone a sense of who's here, how many of you are here from Cornell Ithaca? Raise your hand. All right, how many of you are here from MIT or Harvard? Great, and Cornell Tech? All right, in the back, nice. And from somewhere else? Oh, great, how many mentors do we have here already? You're a mentor